Howdy everyone, this is Dave, and in this video, we will be talking about the Smalls Lighthouse Tragedy. Originating in Egypt around 280 BC, lighthouses have been long used for maritime coastal navigation, acting as a traffic signal of the sea. From simple lights in the harbor to becoming designated structures, their purpose has always remained the same: guide ships through treacherous waters and act as a homing beacon to call seafarers home. In order to ensure the lighthouse did its job, there would need to be someone there to look after it. Lighthouse keepers, or wickies, were men and women assigned to keep watch over the lighthouse. It wasn't an easy life. When they weren't standing and watching to make sure the light was still on, they were cleaning, doing repairs and maintenance, and meticulously recording every aspect of their stay at the lighthouse. From logging each and every supply item that was used, to giving a detailed account of the tasks that were performed that day. Depending on when and where in the world the lighthouse was, there were different rules and regulations. In some places it was common, if it wasn't too remote, for a married wickie to bring his wife and children with him. The wives serving crucial roles by helping wherever was needed. They even gave birth at the lighthouse. There were instances where it would be manned by two wickies, such as old British lighthouses. The two men would remain at their post for long shifts in complete isolation. But this was changed in 1801 after a very unfortunate incident occurred. The Smalls Lighthouse can be found on the largest grouping of rocks, located 20 miles west of Pembrokeshire, Wales. It is extremely isolated, as it is 8 miles away from the nearest land and is surrounded by jagged rocks. The original structure was built between 1775 and 1776 and stood on oak pillars, which allowed the stormy waters below to pass beneath it, while the keepers sat on top of it in a small hut that swayed helplessly above the raging storms. The lighthouse stood for 80 years, until a new structure was built in the 19th century. The lighthouse was automated in 1987, but before that, even a lighthouse located in the middle of nowhere still had to be manned by an actual person. For centuries, lighthouses were operated by private companies and appointed individuals. The downside of this was that the wickie would have no guarantee that they would leave the lighthouse once they were dropped off. The keeper could simply be forgotten about, with job roles on land changing and information slipping through the cracks. What if the business went under while they were stationed there? Who would be sending a boat for help? Who would be paying for it? They could find themselves staying for much longer than anticipated. Thomas Griffith and Thomas Howell were employees stationed at the Smalls Lighthouse in the spring of 1801. An average length of stay for an English lighthouse keeper was between 4 and 6 months. In that time frame, aside from the other wickie, there would be no other interactions. There wasn't much to keep themselves occupied, and that, combined with being cooped up and the general anxiety of the job, could have devastating effects on one's mental health. Howell and Griffith were assigned for 6 months, with only each other for company during that time. Even though they would share the same living space, they were anything but friends. They had worked together before, and they simply did not get along. Their personalities would clash so often that grievances turned into heated arguments, which occasionally escalated to violence. Even though they would resolve their disputes and return to work as if nothing happened, it was something that was common knowledge, which makes me wonder why they were even stationed together to begin with. 2 months into their assignment, Griffith suddenly fell ill. Howell tried to help him, and even raised an emergency distress flag in hopes of getting the attention of a passing ship. Unfortunately, it was no use. No one was coming to their aid, and Griffith was getting steadily worse. My sources don't say what he could have been sick from, but it seems to have been an excruciatingly painful and drawn-out death. taking weeks for him to finally draw his last breath, leaving Howell alone, miles out at sea, with a dead body. Even though the men were not friends, he didn't want him to die. If given the choice, I'm sure you would rather be alone with a person you don't get along with, over a rotting corpse. Howell didn't move Griffith out of the living quarters until he began to decompose. After that, Howell was put in an unusual predicament. Should he give his colleague's remains a burial out at sea, or should he keep him intact until help arrives? He was initially going to throw the body into the ocean, but then a thought occurred to him. He was known to have difficult and even physically hostile relations with Thomas Griffith. Ultimately, Howell figured that if he got rid of the body, then it would look suspicious when help did arrive. Without any sort of evidence, it would be assumed that he murdered his coworker and disposed of his remains. Howell had experience as a cooper in his earlier life, so he was able to create a makeshift coffin to store the body. It was made of wooden planks and kept outside, nailed to the exterior of the lighthouse, out of sight, so he didn't have to keep looking at it. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no response to the distress signal. It is likely that it wasn't taken as seriously, since Howell was able to keep the lighthouse lit. This was because he was worried about incurring massive fines if he failed to keep it going. The light being on is the essential role of the lighthouse, so if that was still operating just fine, then how bad could it be? All the while, Griffith's body was decomposing, filling the lighthouse with the putrescent odor of death. It took 2 months for a rescue attempt to be made, but due to the time of year, the waves were much too high for the boats to dock safely. After hours of unsuccessful attempts, they had to turn back. However, they noticed that there was an arm waving to them from the tower. This gave the rescuers hope for the best, but little did they know the true nature of what they just saw. Because of the harsh weather, the coffin began to break and blow apart, exposing Griffith's remains. What they actually saw was Thomas Griffith's decomposing arm waving in the wind. What seemed like a good sign to the rescuers was in fact a terror for Howell, as the corpse haunted him constantly, the arm beckoning him to meet his colleague out into the ocean, where he could join him in death. It took another 4 months for a successful rescue attempt to be made, and Howell had no choice but to spend that entire time with the body. It's not that people weren't trying to rescue him, but the waves and rock formations made landing treacherous, even for the most hardened sailors and vessels. A downside of the distress flag was that this was before any reliable long-distance communication was created, even before Morse code. So they knew there was something going on due to the flag, but the lack of details kept them from knowing the true nature of the signal. One time, the rescue team saw an outline of Howell standing on the gallery of the lighthouse. They couldn't make out if he said anything, but he just stood there, watching them. Thomas Howell made the right decision not to get rid of the body, because he was finally rescued and was able to provide evidence. It was verified that Thomas Griffith had died of natural causes, and this exonerated Howell of a murder charge. That was not the end of it for Thomas Howell. Being rescued was the easy part. Unfortunately, he never recovered from the trauma of what he experienced for all of those months. The toll it took on him mentally and physically changed him. He was almost unrecognizable to his own family members when he returned. After the incident, there were changes in protocol, adding an additional lighthouse keeper in case something like this were to ever happen again. Many thought the Smalls Lighthouse was cursed, and a couple decades later, the superstitions of many were confirmed when an unusually large wave crashed into the lighthouse, killing one of the 3 lighthouse keepers and nearly toppling it over. Even though it was a catastrophe, having the additional wiki prevented the same situation from unfolding. The practice was carried out until lighthouses became automated. This event had an impact on those who had heard about it, and has inspired many stories throughout history, including the movie The Lighthouse from 2019. Alright everyone, that's all I've got for this video. If you enjoy my content, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, have a good one.